Hey, hello, I'm Ren Ribeiro, and I want to connect with you about peace and justice. We are interviewing women who labor for peace, as we have forever and always will, until we all feel peace in our homes, our workplaces, our communities, and especially our bodies and minds. This initiative is named Mujéres Co-Labor for Peace. It's a show of intimate conversations with justice workers who are healing their self and communities from the effects of misogyny, capitalism, and climate change. Welcome back to the second part of our MC4P intimate conversation with Susan Raffo. She is journeying from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. Last time we heard about how inspired conversation brings grace to life's challenges, the experience of bodywork for children, some of the appropriated history of craniosacral therapy, and ways to hold one another with active heart intention. In this part, we dive again into how language connects or disconnects, Susan's experience co-laboring on the Healing Histories Project, and their beyond impressive 500 plus year timeline of the medical industrial complex through stories of care and control. Enjoy.
Actually, yeah, that's so true. Like the morning after we walked, I woke up and I was thinking about what Socrates said about the more I learn, the less I know, or something like that. And I was, excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip. I was reflecting on how much work I've done in kind of confronting fear in my life, and realize like the more I do it, the more I realize how much more more fear there is to reckon with. And like that spiral staircase, it's like up, down,
big time,
always on it. And you had shared some really pertinent advice about not using the word trauma, but instead focusing on action, like reconciliation, resolving conflict, direct action or resistance, or speaking truth, just being like holding oneself accountable, and others calling in that kind of action, and other kind of ways of being proactive in the world. And I was wondering how you might answer a question like, in what ways or how have you learned to not internalize fear? Not, obvious in all situations, but what's your practice like to not internalize fear? Because there's just so much of it.
Yeah, I don't think I don't internalize fear. I think I'm so I want to back up to what you just said about trauma and then go there, is like I think that I think it's less about not internalizing fear. It's more about practicing not overriding fear, which actually shifts the shape of it, right? Because this will be the only time in my life that I will ever quote John F. Kennedy Jr. But having been born in 1963, and so growing up, in the year after he was assassinated, and where people were, my family and the folks around me, first Catholic president, were all in the JFK sort of, oh, glory. Excuse me, is I heard growing up the quote a lot, you have nothing to fear, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, so the only time I will ever coach Kennedy Jr. or John F. Kennedy, not the junior, that was his son. And so there's and to me, because of the fear of fear, there's often an override that happens in 1,000 ways. And I actually think, when you said I don't use words like trauma, I mean, I do still use, but my practice is to be as concrete as possible. So I feel what it is that I'm saying, as opposed to using linguistic language shorthand. And I still do. I use so much jargon, but I really try not to, so that whatever it is I'm describing, and I'm going to use jargon for a second, whether it is a profound act of supremacy or oppression, or whether it is a deep harm or something like that, that rather than talking about it in a vague abstract way, is that I want to talk about it concretely and directly as something that is about real people and real life. And then be really thoughtful about who I'm talking to when I'm when I'm telling that story. It's one thing to be talking to somebody I've shared experience with about some form of a story of violence, where we have some amount of distance from that story versus talking to somebody whose people have been impacted by story violence. So there's also loving relationship with who I'm talking with, but to be as clear as possible, because I started to notice how much I had developed a language that essentially overrode the helplessness and the fear that I actually feel about the scale of pain and violence that is both historical and in the present moment, right? So for me to talk about what is happening in Gaza is to get as specific as possible, not describing it as though it's a horror film, but in some way to honor as sacred the lives who are the lives of those who are being killed, and to, or if I can't do that, is to not talk about it, but to feel it, is to not always use words. So it's like, I don't know how to do this half the time. And it's awkward. And sometimes I override automatically, but that's what I'm listening for, is like, am I in some way using language to distance myself from truth and feeling, and in particular, what is intolerable, like the feeling of helplessness and overwhelm? Am I storying it? Because, right, that's what we do with words. We tell a story in a way that turns it into an object, which then we can understand it and we can put it on a shelf and say, we are now done. And, I think of how many traditional teachers, traditional to this land, traditional to other lands, that say words are power, they are spells, they are magic. It's all of the things you're using different. And so even how I'm talking about what I believe we need to change, whether from a political or a spiritual or both sort of a place, is the aliveness has to stay in the language. And sometimes that actually means I do a lot of listening for the history of a word to try to get at the life that's still there. Because English, unfortunately, has become a language that so often the words have lost some of the life in them, right? I think about the word duty, D-U-T-Y, which is a word that often in English is either feels like something that you are proud to hold, like it is my duty, and sort of patriotism really relies on that word.
Yeah.
Or it can feel like a burden.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's all of these things that there's something transactional in them or separated. It is my duty as a patriot. Sort of separated, I pull myself up. Or it is my duty, it's transactional, I got to do it because I said I would. But what's fascinating is that the roots of that word are about an interchange and an interdependence that is back and forth, not transactional, but flowing. Right now, as I'm sitting with you, I can't remember the exact definition of it, but I remember the feeling of it. Like that's the old meaning. So I'm like, oh, the people who evolved English got lost from interdependence into burden, and responsibility as burden, as opposed to responsibility as you know, the ability to be between each other, right? And so sometimes to get to like the aliveness of a moment, I'll listen and come through a word, so that in this moment, if I say I feel a duty to being in relationship to what is happening in Palestine right now, it is the old sense of the word. It is that I'm feeling my way into the interrelationship without with full awareness of of what the relationship is that is here. I have beloveds who are Palestinian who live in the West Bank right now, so there is some relationship, but still, there's a distance. I'm a Euro-Christian person mostly. But that word duty helps me to find a relationship when I think about the old meaning of it, which helps to get away from that override, which helps me to really be like, no, really, what is here and what is not here? How am I awake and alive
It's
in
so
this moment?
embodied. Yeah, you're describing such an embodiment of like what's in my body mind as one, like, and what's coming out of
Yes,
my mouth because it's in my body, that, and I'm
yes,
trying to practice this, like, where am I holding tension and why? Because that feels
yes,
like the way I
yeah,
override I'm not even at the readiness level for holding my words. I am on some level holding my words accountable, but I'm not in the flow of kind of what you're describing. I aspire to be that way. So, I'm like growing and curious and open to that. But I am really noticing like, oh, why is there some tension in this left side of me? And I've actually come to understand that this is where I saw my brother die. And so it's been here for so long, and I've done a lot of healing, but I'm befriending this part of my body, like the internal family systems kind of parts work, to really understand that, which I'm not going to go into my thoughts on that. And then what else I was thinking about as you were talking is and I'm already losing it a little. Oh shoot. So I do feel like what you were talking about brings me to the research I did of your work with the Healing Histories Project. Would you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think it's a great link because Healing Histories Project, I want to say that there's a framework that deeply shapes and informs my work, which is called the Healing Justice Framework. It's a framework that was named by Black feminist healers, practitioners, organizers in the South who are part of Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective. And they named it as a way of looking at people who are working for social change, who are building movement, and as a way of looking at how care exists within movement. And also, in particular, around looking at the impact of generational trauma, recognizing that those who are seeking to shift systems that are still impacting themselves and their family are deeply impacted by it while doing the work of change. And that is also something that needs to be attended to while doing the work. Otherwise, folks are continually burning out. And again, harm is being perpetrated. And so I encountered the framework really early in my practice as a cranial therapist. It changed everything for me because, I was like, oh, here we are. There actually are people who are who are weaving together healing practices and political work in ways that are seamless. It's not surprising. It is often the case that this is Black leadership, Black feminist leadership that brought that to bear. And so I also became, quite close with the folks at Kindred who named this framework. And we began working together. And in particular, a beloved friend of mine, Kara Page, who's the person who first named Healing Justice and who's part of Kindred. We started working together with a friend of ours named Anjali and a couple of others. We were organizing through something called the US Social Forum in Detroit, which would take too much time to explain. But if people are curious and you go to my website, you can see a report about what we did at the USSF, which is really practicing what we're calling healing justice, or what is called healing justice. But what emerged out of that framework and our relationship together, Anjali was emergency room doctor, part of Casa de Salud in New Mexico. Myself as a craniosacral and organizer, Kara as an organizer and also practitioner, is we started really, a bunch of us had already been working on timelines as tools for political education and or for change. And so we started building a timeline of the medical industrial complex, which we published online 2 years ago. It's really looking at 500 plus years of how care became control. So it's really looking at how the very systems that we are seeking to change impact how care is shaped. And of course, not always. And there are multiple people who work inside that system who are trying really hard to sort of shift, to work against harmful care. And also, there are so many ways in which lineages of Western care have really been deeply supportive, including saving the lives of people I love. So this is like not an anti-medicine. It's not a binary power struggle. Instead, it is saying, like all things, Western medicine has been shaped, as it is practiced in the United States, has been shaped by eugenic thinking and eugenic practice. It has been shaped by the very histories we're trying to change. And that often when we reform some of these ways of doing care, there will be a change for a while, but then some of those roots of violence will show up and continue again. So it's really showing that across 500 plus years, there's stories on the timeline, like the stories of tuberculosis, which sort of talks about how anti-Black racism has impacted both how tuberculosis was managed in the 19th century, but how that also shapes how different forms of lung disease and lung care, et cetera, are still racialized in the care response. There's a story of rural health which I really worked on before this walk because I wanted to understand as I live in a city and I'm going to be walking a lot in rural communities,
Mhm.
the profound, constant defunding and destruction of rural healthcare networks
Mm.
that has existed since the early part of the 1900s and late 1800s. So it's just again showing that if at its core, um, community survival, thrival is about how we care for ourselves and each other, and then the systems that support that care. Then, when we have systems where you cannot guarantee that you will be met with respect and love, and particularly depending on your identity and positionality, there's a good chance you won't be.
Mm.
Then this is a way of looking at so we do public research, and then the other piece we hold and is we're just in the middle of it. Is our first cohort. It's a year-long cohort bringing together physicians, nurses, healthcare practitioners and healers, medical researchers, therapists, organizers, um, in a year-long practice that is about building our capacity to intervene on harmful care when it arises. And that doesn't just mean it, that means everything from building relationships to end isolation,
Mm.
really doing risk assessment so that we're wise about the risks that we're taking. And the majority of people in this cohort are people of color, they're queer. So what the risks are that are there, building an intervention practice and getting support to sort of be in the cohort and to be doing an intervention and building towards one.
Oh my God.
Sustainability, what it means to be in change work for the long term, recognizing that again, both the impact of generational trauma and also the impact of systems that don't want to change.
Yeah.
Um, some of the most brilliant folks who really are working to make change, and these systems burn out so quickly.
Yeah.
And so, how to be in it for the long term. And also, what an intervention is, with the recognition that sometimes an intervention can be saying no to a meeting that is oppressive and dangerous and just leaving, as
Mm.
well as building collective strategies, all of those things. So the focus is on how are we in this for the long term in such a way that generations to come, how care is held will look different. And that's the Healing Histories Project, www.healinghistoriesproject.org. I love the work and I'm so proud of it. And as a practitioner, a critical therapist now of 20 years, it matters to me that while I am doing care work individually, which is profound and glorious, and I love it so much,
And you're doing it
that
on
I'm also
your
working.
walk. Yeah, like you're even incorporating your
Sometimes I
walk.
am. I am. Is at the same time, I'm also working to shift the context and conditions around that care work.
Mm. Mm.
That feels is important to me at the same time.
Wow. So intersectional, so comprehensive, so multifaceted and elegant and beautiful and rich. I'm just like, like reading all the beautiful words on your website cannot possibly convey, at least to my brain, the richness of what you just shared and the heart-opening hope that's just flooding me because it's so rich and so like smart. I don't know, like there's so many words that that are failing me. And your focus on words is like all of it is so gorgeous. Oh. The one I think about
You
that.
are so kind, Ren. You are very generous with your care. You're very generous.
Oh, but it's like so real. Like you're doing the work that so needs to happen on so many levels. Like the the personal, the interpersonal, the systemic, the economic. I mean, there's just so many layers and levels that you're in community around and weaving, and it's gorgeous, and I'm like, feel it. So I'm hoping that anybody listening or watching this grasps the vastness of what you're doing with the Healing Histories Project, and that 500-year timeline is so empowering to people who might be like, I'm just so done with this. Oh, but look at this gift that so many people came together to co-create and to co-labor for peace. Mujeres co-labor for peace. And it's not just women, of course, but the feminine in all of us is what understands community and understands the need to heal all of us in our bones, like your book. Like, there's just so much, just so much. I'm sorry to be such a raving fan.
Well, you're kind, and for me, what I hear in your words is that the values that you hold dear to you and the things that you hope for and hunger for in some way are met in our conversation, and so they get larger, which then helps you to feel your own aliveness and clarity about your own work. And so that is just like I honor
The
what
tears
is
are all
sparked
here.
alive in you and your clarity and your hunger and that sense of I'm assuming nourishment. Like I honor that because to me that is how we like that's how we do this work is in the moments as you said where it's just hard and lonely. You know, I always find that time is such a support because it is for me that timeline. I look at it and I'm like, oh, so some things have changed. It would be foolish to say that nothing has changed. Some things have definitely changed. And look at this constant lineage of people who, in in periods that are similar to the one we live in, and in periods that have so much more weight and intensity, are still looking to say, how can I do something different in small ways and in large ways? You know, is resistance has always been there. And for folks who are white and Christian and where possibly those elements have been numbed out, or possibly we don't necessarily feel or see, we are protected from feeling and seeing the impact of what our ancestors in present time kin are doing, or just how these different systems impact. Like it also matters to remember that we also have been resisting all along. Is that there's also, you know, folks who have continued to fight, and not nearly enough yet, and not nearly enough. We continue. I mean, that's so much of what this walk is for me is to continue to reach out and be in relationship to all of our kin who maybe are not aligned politically in the same way, who don't understand why the world is the way it is right now in the same way that you and I might do. You know, but to continue to say, my heart is open to you. How are we in relationship with each other? How, you know, how is care showing up? What are the potentials that are here
Mm.
in a time where the profound violence and the divide between, you know, well, just this how way too many of our white Christian kin right now are leading a charge that is intending to destroy and take us back in so many ways.
So
And
many.
so, yeah, it's like anything that helps us to feel connected to each other and rooted and with a sense of not the old, you know, this new meaning of duty, this
Yes, I
sort
was
of
going to go back.
transactional exchange, but something that is relational and connected.
Yeah, I was really just going to go back to that duty word that you're like unpacking and reclaiming in its fullness. Because it brought to my mind, as someone who shares that Christian Catholic, or for me it was Catholic anyway,
Me too.
conditioning, yeah, is the word repentance. So that word is another one of those words that is so burdened and so heavy, and like, it just like sits in the body like garbage. Um, but its actual meaning is reflection, like to do the inner work, like inner
Of
fortune. The name of my organization, Inner Fortune. It's about that self-reflection. That's what repentance means in Aramaic, So like, let's reclaim and dust off and help these beautiful words to shine, you know?
and to be them again, it's like the difference of, you know, the sort of contemporary repentance, which is almost, you know, I lay my body at your feet in full repentance, and then I will either be free or not free based on whether you forgive me, which means it's your responsibility to forgive me, which means that as soon as I repent, you better forgive me or you're a bad person. I
Yeah.
mean, what a setup
Abdicating all of
versus to
our personal authority
reflect.
and agency to others, or to
Oh,
a system, right? To the patriarchy, or to,
totally.
power oppressors. Mm.
No, it's beautiful you said, rather as opposed to reflect, and by reflecting, to become other, which then means going forward, we will be different.
Mhm.
And in the moments where there is repair that is relational and possible, that is there, as opposed to hoisting our repair off on those we have harmed and say, here, I'm ready to repair, take it, do it. It's like it's just continually perpetuating it. That's beautiful. Thank you. I will sit with that. I did not know the origins of that word.
Wow. Oh, so much goodness. I'm gonna close here because I try to keep things to 30 minutes, and I want to get every single word of yours with what your final thoughts are about your walk and your hopes, and what you're feeling about that. And then I want to read a quote of yours from your website. So gorgeous. So tell us about your walk from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and what it's like so far, and kind of what you're feeling about it.
Been dreaming about this since I was 16, walking from the Atlantic to the Pacific. I've only done the first month, which was my practice month. I started in Castine, Maine, and came down to Northampton, Massachusetts, which is, well, actually Greenfield, Massachusetts, which is where I am right now. Got to walk with you towards the end of it for 9 miles per day, which included some beautiful off-road walking through some woods that I was really grateful that we got to do, even while it infested some bodies. And I will be on Wednesday, in a few days from now, starting again. And I've often said that after this first month of prep, where I stayed in with people's homes and all sorts of things, is that starting on when I start again on Wednesday, I will be doing a lot of camping. I'm carrying a backpack. Um, I'm actually in the process of redoing my website about the walk, because I knew I wanted to wait till the first month to sort of have more language about what this is. I Most of everything about the walk still exists in long paragraphs inside me, but I can say this is that I am walking to listen and to learn how it is possible to live on this land together in a good way. And I am doing that with accountability for my kin, who are part of what's getting in the way of that, as relationship with the land itself and the histories it holds, including the people whose stories, culture, and instructions come from the land. And also with awareness that I am one little person walking every day, and I will be responding to what shows up in the present moment, rather than my practice is to not prejudge what is going to happen in any way,
Nice.
which is can be pretty bloody hard. So
Good self-care and all of the things to like taking care of your feet and your heart. Oh, I loved having
yes,
with your heart.
yes. Shout out for those who live totally, and shout out for those who live in Western Massachusetts. There's something that you all have a company that's based in like Northampton and Greenfield called Foot by Nurses, and I reached out to them because I was like, I need to have a conversation about feet, because as a body worker, I'm realizing there's some things about walking every day, because I'm not trained as an athlete. Like there's other ways of looking at the body that I don't know. So such a kind person, met with me on a Sunday on Mother's Day, bringing her 2 children into the office to teach me about my feet and do some foot care. And then they offered it to me as a pro bono gift, just to say they want to support my walk and the reason I'm walking. So I just want to give them a shout out, folks listening to this in Western Mass. If there are people who are homebound for any reason, they are so kind.
Beautiful. Well, I will definitely link their website. I am just again so remembering our walk, and the gorgeousness of the day and all the conversations, and oh yeah, feeling that nourishment that we had with each other. It
It
was
was a good, good, good day. It was a good day.
So I'm going to leave with this quote of yours. What is your next most elegant move? It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be next. And we don't have to know where it will lead. It just has to be responsive to something we feel and care about. Susan Raffo. Thank you, dear one. You're such a light in the world, and I wish you well, and may all the people that you touch be inspired by your walk. And I feel like you're carrying me with you. Hopefully that's not, you're not carrying so many people that it adds to
For
the
sure.
35-pound bag that you got on your back.
You are not a burden. And again, thank you for your labor, Ren, like doing this work. So I'm just going to say, I really wanted to say that I feel gratitude to you for the work that you were doing, not just for this particular episode of the podcast, but for all of them. Podcasts have been a real self-care thing for me, because some of the times on some of the roads I'm walking on, lots of semis, lots of traffic, lots of trash. And I stay present with it for a bit, but it can be pretty soul wearying. And so when I reach the point where I'm like, I just need to have a break from this constant big roads, I'll listen to a podcast, which helps me to feel connected to something else. And then I will listen until the point at which I get to move to a different road where there's a little more space. It's not that constant, impersonal, loud, speeding trucks barreling by. So I feel so much gratitude right now for those who've spent the labor to create these moments that help us to connect to each other. So to you, Ren, thank you for this labor. Seriously, it's not small.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, to all of us Mujeres co-laboring for peace. May this ripple out far and wide, across from the Atlantic to the Pacific, like your walk.
For sure.
Well, blessings on the rest of your journey, and to all your hopes for the way, the beauty way.
And to you, Ren, so much care.
Till soon.
Mm-hmm.
I am Ren Ribeiro, and I thank you so very much for joining. This initiative is supported by Inner Fortune, the full life self-coaching journal that is now digital. Join us for peace, and thank you for your heart.